Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great and enjoy these stories. If you want to support my channel, then make sure you check out my Patreon in the description. You can also get early access to my videos there. Make sure you also check out my podcast, which is in the description too. I have a quick message before the story starts, so for today I'd like to share this. If you're somebody who struggles with mental health and is experiencing tough times, then I think it's very important not to judge your situation and try not to feel bad in yourself. Because the best thing that you can do is focus on the action that you need to do to make things better, and then try and live a balanced and enjoyable life in the meantime. It will get better even if it doesn't seem like it now. I know even for myself, I can make things seem a lot worse than they are, just in my own head, by getting emotionally invested when I shouldn't, and letting things get me down. I don't really have it anymore now, but I remembered I used to have that, versus just doing the best I could, doing the things I know I needed to, and then making sure that I took time out to have a balanced and happy life in between it. And then, in time, everything turned around for me, and I know it can do it for you too. So yeah, just try and remain mindful in those times to take care of yourself, and remember it's probably not as bad as it seems, and that you are able to turn it all around. So I hope you're all doing great and enjoyed these stories. I'll speak to you all soon. So this happened to me when I was around 16 years old. I was in high school and living in my parents' ranch home in western Pennsylvania. For several weeks, I would have a hard time falling asleep because every time I did, I would see this freakishly deformed, weird goat creature standing on two legs. It scared me. I had several nightmares of this goat slowly walking towards me. One night I was absolutely terrified, more so than usual. I decided to get up and use the restroom to see if this is going to help me relax and reset my brain so I can get some sleep. As I exited the bedroom, the living room is off to the right of the hallway, and I just stopped and froze solid. There in the blackness of my parents' living room was a minuscule amount of moonlight shining through the triangular windows, and there's the goat man. He was about 6 feet tall, menacing and deformed and evil looking. The most messed up part is that this goat man was on his front legs, or arms. I don't know what to call them, but it kind of stood up on its hoof things. Now he was moving slowly but in a dancing, swaying fashion. I just dipped into my room and closed my eyes and hid under the covers. I couldn't force myself to scream or face it any longer, so I guess I just chose to ignore it. Luckily, I've not seen the creature since. I've told my family about it and they think it's hilarious. They bring it up in conversation as a joke now from time to time because they know it scares me. But I know exactly what I saw, even though I'm 28 now, and I still get goosebumps all across my body when I think about this. Now this happened quite a long time ago. So, I was quite young at the time. This was in Australia in 2003, and we took a pretty sketchy shortcut home through the edge of a large wilderness area to meet my friend's mum home, so she wouldn't find out that we'd been out roaming late at night. Something massive we couldn't yet see stalked us from a distance, then put on speed when we were nearing the only main turn in the trail. Freaking out, we try and beat it, but not long after my friend stopped and looked back at us. I then did too. We can see the silhouette of a massive head and shoulders just watching us. Its eyes shine red and orange in the moonlight. The thing blended in with the bush on either side of the trail and stalks us the rest of the way. When we got to the other end, we couldn't breathe and stopped under a streetlight for whatever reason to make ourselves feel safe. We last saw the thing in the tree line while we were under the light. It looked at us and then just turned back and went back into the bush, and that was it. We spent the rest of the early morning hours googling what it could have been and found out about the Yowie. So we threw together an average report about it based on the collection of 3 parts of us remembering. I didn't remember noises or smell, but the other guys did. They didn't remember any of the details of its features, but I 100% saw some texture of fur. Now, I think I've told this story in other places over the years, but it really scared the life out of me being stalked by something like this. Now, a few years ago, I went camping for the first time in my life. I was about 11 or 12 and we headed out to a forest nearby our house. We're in Poland for the holidays, and right next to our house is a huge forest. So one day, we decided to take out my mum's old tent that she had from like the 90s and just stay there for the night or two in the beautiful wildlife. Good thing. The place we chose to sleep was about 20, maybe 30 minutes away from the house. Bad thing. There's a lot, and I mean a lot of wolves, foxes, boars out in the forest, and honestly, I kind of regretted going out there in the first place. We saw everything cut around 6 PM, and my sister and I set up the campfire. My dad chopped down a smaller tree earlier with his oak axe, and by now it dried out enough to catch fire. We sat around it for some time, probably around 4 hours until it was dark, so we decided that we just had to sleep then. My sister and I on one end of the tent and our parents on the other. Now it was probably just a fear of getting eaten alive by some wolves or some homesickness, but I can't sleep. Now, I hear my dad telling my mum that he was going out into the forest to get some wood for the morning while it was fairly dry, or it would have all soaked up the dew by then. The thought of not having my dad around makes it even worse for me to even close my eyes for a second. I'm not good at telling what the time is, and I just stare up at the sky, trying to figure out how long it's been, so I'll just say around 12 or 1 in the morning. I was actually falling asleep when I hear some rattling outside the tent. My first thought is that it's a wolf. I was terrified, so I just popped out and look around. Now I see if it's my dad there. My dad's still gone. It's been about an hour since he went. I lay back down and just tried to fall asleep, but when I turned around to my side, I saw this faint human shadow outside the tent. I froze and let out a tiny squeak. The person seemed to be holding some kind of axe, shovel type thing in his hand. So I thought that maybe it's my dad back. The shadow then walks towards the entrance of the tent and just stood there and unzipped the door for maybe 30 seconds. I began to wonder why he wasn't coming back inside. The person finally ran into the forest but dropped the axe. You could hear the footsteps fade into the distance in a thump. Now, maybe a minute or two later, I hear my dad walking back from the opposite side of the forest and enter the tent all tired and just fall asleep. Now it seemed kinda sketchy and fishy and scary to me, but it's so late, I couldn't even think anymore about how I would fall asleep. The next morning I woke up after my dad dropped his phone on his face, letting out an ouch. I peeped through the curtain at him and he just smiled back, rubbing his nose. I needed some fresh air because I was feeling a bit sick, maybe from the nerves in the morning or homesickness, I couldn't really tell. Both of us got out of the tent and walked around for a while. We circled around the campsite for about 10 minutes until we come back to the tent. That's when I noticed something that sent chills down my back. A few meters from the tent, in the corner of my eye, I managed to catch a glimpse of something red. It took me a hot second to realize I actually saw something, and then I turned my head to see what it was, and there's a red and black axe. It was not there before. It wasn't my dad's because his was by the pile of wood he collected. Now, from my dad's reaction, apparently I turned pale, looking like I was gonna faint. He then turned his gaze to where I was looking, and both of us just stared a few seconds before he called out for the rest of the family to wake up and move. We all packed up within an hour and rushed home. I later told my dad that I saw everything, and he doesn't believe me. I carried on with the story, and he finally realizes I was telling the truth. To this day, I have no clue what that was, but I'm just happy that he didn't go out to investigate further. Me and a friend of mine decided to go camping one day in the national park not so far from where we lived. I've been friends with this individual for quite a long time and I really trusted him. He wasn't necessarily the best with outdoors types things, but he had a pretty good mind and common sense to danger, so that made it really easy for us to get along with each other and do the adventures which were outside. However, this one particular incident I can honestly never forget about. Let me explain. So we go out into the forest and we're trying to get to our camping site. Things are pretty normal at the time, to be honest. We had a beautiful little stream running to the left of us. My friend was keen to go down there and try and catch some fish. Now I should mention that this friend has actually never done fishing before, so I don't know why he actually suggested it, and I thought it was quite funny because it was a bit of a silly thing to do. We ended up agreeing that it was a good idea for us both to go down there and do so. The problem was it wasn't going to be easy for us to traverse the terrain to actually get down there, so obviously this was going to be no easy manner or thing to overcome. We kind of both skidded down and my friend actually got his legs pretty cut up doing this. I don't know why he had shorts on. He literally always wears shorts no matter what the weather is, but I guess it didn't matter so much. Luckily I've got some pants on which actually take most of the blows for me, so I'm not really in a bad way when we get down there. He had a little fishing kit he brought with himself, and honestly it's the cheapest thing that I've ever seen. You have to really wrap the reel round as well. I don't know how to describe it, but it's kind of like if you had a bit of plastic and just wrapped a fishing line round it. Also, we didn't have much bait. In fact, we actually lost half of the bait immediately when putting things down and setting up. All that happened was half of it went into the water, some of it got off the reel, and we didn't find a thing. That's when my friend tells me, "Hey, who's that over there?" We look up and we can see a figure just off the water staring at us. It looked like a normal person, but wearing clothes which makes it hard to actually see their face. It looks like quite an old person from what we can tell. They slowly fade off into the bushes without saying a word to us, and that was weird. We both say that maybe we're not meant to fish here, and we quickly pack up everything and try and get away. I didn't really want to spend too much time down here, and the whole point of the trip was to try and get away from people. So obviously we're not going to be able to do that with some weirdo watching, so we head up. Now, if getting down was an issue, getting up was a whole different kettle of fish. We're really struggling to get up. My friend also wasn't the most athletic of people, so he's really struggling. He weighs a lot more than me, so I'm also very out of breath from trying to help him get up over the rocks. We eventually do it though. Also I can see that his cuts have dried now, which is a good thing, so we continue on. My friend actually jokes that it kind of looks like we're walking into some kind of horror film, as you can see lots of moss on the trees and everything becoming more and more dense, but I guess it wasn't much of an issue then. We're both quite similar in thinking and we were just talking about much of anything. At this point in our lives we were getting a little bit older, but we're fairly young. We thought we knew the world, but my god we didn't. But yeah, we quickly forget about the weird person on the lake. Now, eventually we make it much further and we also can't decide exactly where we want to set up our tent. It didn't become an argument, but it kind of became like a stalemate where neither of us could actually find a good spot. My friend then says, "Alright, I'm gonna go off and find a good spot." And you do the same, so I agreed. I ended up going by the river following it, thinking it's an easy way to navigate back. The thing was, we didn't actually check if our phones had battery or if we could actually communicate with each other, so this was the first idea that what we were doing was pretty stupid. However, being the stupid ones, we persist. It's not too much longer that I actually bumped into a park ranger. He was questioning what I was doing out here on my own, and I explained that I'm just out here with my buddy and we're trying to find somewhere good to camp. It turned out that he's actually really helpful and suggests a really good place for me to go that we're allowed to be on. He then wants me to tell my friend that I can't be walking around at night like that, apparently it's scaring people. I say, what do you mean? I say, we've only just got here for one day, and he says, oh, sorry. I ask him to elaborate more, but he says he can't say too much about it, but just to watch ourselves out here. So that was great. I thought maybe it was just a person we'd seen earlier, and I described what I'd seen, but he said it's nothing to worry about. He said, did you see anybody fishing? And I said no. He said, oh, okay, good. I didn't want to let on to the fact that I was fishing. I was actually quite paranoid and decided that later on I was going to bury our fishing gear. I know it's a stupid thing because obviously they're not going to come and search us, but I didn't want to get in trouble. He then says, yeah, so where exactly has your body gone? I then say, I don't know, I'm going to find him later. He says, do you want me to help you locate him? And I say, yeah, sure. So we start walking back. Now, I'm excited to tell my friend that we've got a camping spot, but I think maybe he's found a better one as we pass through some rocks. That's when we see something. There's some kind of movement up ahead, and I think it's my friend, so I call out his name. That's when we're met with a really weird sound. It sounds like the grunts of a wild boar or something, but much, much deeper. It goes on for a few seconds and kind of makes thudding sounds. Me and the park ranger look at each other confused, and we go up ahead to see what it is. I start to panic a little bit and think, well, maybe there's something wrong with my friend, and I'm worried that he's got hurt and in trouble somehow now. So we're now moving much, much quicker. However, we eventually aren't able to find him, and I think, well, I don't know. I hope he's okay. I say it out sarcastically, and the ranger looks at me a little bit concerned, which worries me. Now, not too much longer after, he says, hey. And I hear hey back, and he comes out of the woods and says, who's this? He then realizes this is a park ranger, and he starts to apologize. I kind of look at him as if to say, just shut up, because I realize that he's about to say sorry for fishing and expose us and probably get us in trouble or kicked out of the park, but luckily the ranger doesn't realize, and we're able basically to go back to normal. Now the ranger says, just be careful out here, guys, as he turns around to leave. For some reason, I don't know if it was like a core memory or something, but it really stuck in my mind seeing his kind of pointy hat like that. I was like, you know what, that's one really cool dude. And I then explained to my friend that he's been really helpful to me and that he helped us find a really good spot. Now my buddy then says, I've got a good one too, but I tell him, no, just follow this one. The guy knows his stuff better than me, and he agrees, and we both head out. We're in a nicer area of the forest now, and we're just about to go back to where we were, following the opposite direction. We can both see some really nice hills up in the distance that we're excited to be able to trek on in the following day. My buddy then notices something. Up on the horizon, you can see the silhouette of somebody moving up and down the hill. Now, we didn't really get too close, but we thought, God, they're like an Olympic runner. But he's moving in some kind of weird dance way, that's the only way I can describe it. Because where we're standing and the fact that this is new territory, we really don't have a good scout as to what's actually up ahead of us. So we decide just to ignore it. And we continue on anyway. We think, well, we're definitely not going to be moving very quick when we actually get up there. So we just turn back and go on like everything's normal. Now again, the scenery is beautiful too. The path is actually a lot more overgrown and it makes it more difficult to actually travel here. We're also getting quite muddy. I say we, I mean my friend, especially on his lower legs. He has some wipes, but he's getting through them at the speed of light, trying to keep his legs clean. And I tell him, no, just wait until later. You're gonna burn through these, just do it later. He then agrees and stops. I don't know why he was doing it. Even to this day I still laugh about it in my head. But we press on, as always. Now we get back to the camping spot and everything's pretty much as it should be. We're both feeling pretty good at the time and start to settle in and get ready to have a good night's sleep. So we put all of our things down and we're both very relaxed in this moment. Now not too long after we're relaxed, we suddenly realise something's weird. There's some kind of horse sounds outside the tent. It wasn't really too dark at this point, but we don't have much light in us other than the moonlight. It literally sounds like a horse is outside. We unzipped the tent a little bit to try and figure out what this is. For some reason, I had some kind of stupid bravery. I opened the tent and I sprint outside making monster noises. I don't know why I did this. No logic was prevailing at this point. A horse was not going to be a horse here. I thought maybe the park ranger come back to play a prank on me or something. I was quite tired and delirious, but suddenly I woke up enough for the fear in my body to come back, and I start sprinting back in the opposite direction. My buddy's actually scared and said, What happened? I was actually annoyed at him for just staying there waiting to see if I was okay, but I say, well, nothing. He says, what about the horse? I say, there's no horse. We're out here, how could there be a horse in the forest like this? It was hard enough for us to traverse a terrain, let alone a big old horse, so yeah. We thought it was really bizarre, but go to sleep. Don't think too much of it. Now we pack up our things the following morning and we go back down to the stream to just have a wash off. The water was ridiculously cold though, so we don't really go much further than just having our ankles in it. It was at this time that it kind of dawns upon us that what we experienced was pretty weird. There's no reason that a horse should have been out there. I mean, God, there's no reason a horse should have been out there, of course not. It doesn't make sense. So we continue on and decide to leave the area. We're also worried about the people angry at us for fishing, or that person that we thought had saw us, so we go a bit further. That's when we seem to find what appears to be a bit of a cave system or something with lots of rocks. Now my friend, who's quite good at climbing, decides that he's going to become Alex Honnold and decides to start climbing. Then I tell him to stop instantly. Almost on cue, he slides on some of the moss and really hurt his hand and comes back. It's as we're standing here that we hear a sound again. A deep guttural growl, once again like I'd heard with the park ranger before. Now that was really weird, and guess where it was coming from? Deep in the cave. My friend then says hello in a weird high-pitched voice, obviously trying to mock this thing. But we hear it back again, and my friend's confidence goes down. Mine was already at the lowest it could be. We start to slowly back away, as the growls seem to come closer and closer to where we are, but are still very far into the darkness. We now realise that we're probably not as brave as whatever this person is or thing, so we leave it alone. We also thought maybe it was some kind of injured animal. We think maybe it was a boar or something that just sounded like how a horse breathes that come up to our tent looking for food. We both know how dangerous this could be, so we decide to leave it alone. We don't decide to try and communicate with it. But it's so weird. There's no boars around here. There shouldn't be any. The only suggestion we can come up with is that maybe it was somebody's pet who somebody decided that they didn't want anymore. It was weird. So we continue on anyway, still passing through the rocks and the moss and the low-hanging trees. The air was quite moist too, so it makes us feel especially hot and sweaty, which isn't very nice. But eventually we come up to a bridge which I know where should be, so I have a relative idea of where I am now. The bridge was quite an old wooden one. It's actually pretty well designed but relatively rickety, so I didn't feel very safe while walking across it. I just felt like it was about to give way at any possible moment that I was on it. We stand on here, then stop for a moment, roughly in the middle. We're debating if it can take both of our body weights when we hear something. It sounds like a really loud splash in the water below. It sounds like it's right below us, and we try and look over the sides to figure out what this was, but all we can see is this beautiful light blue water rushing under the bridge. That's really bizarre, we think, as we look around trying to locate the source of the sound, but we can't find anything. We now realise how ever so still the air feels and that there's not any sounds around. It becomes quite creepy. I really felt like I was in danger suddenly, and I don't know why, and I can't tell you why this happened. It was really as though somebody had just dropped me into a frying pan, and I knew I have to get out of here. My buddy already started walking away and tells me to hurry up. He's worried that something's fallen off the bridge and we're about to break it. Our combined weight was probably pretty high. It definitely wasn't enough for us to be concerned about the bridge, but it honestly felt like it was about to give way, so we just press on and try not to think about it too much, making a mental note of this being a potential hazard for us. Now, eventually we make it up to the next spot where we need to set up camp for the night. I put the stuff down and my friend says that he's going to go on a walk for a bit just to scout for firewood and stuff. I thought this was a stupid idea because we can pretty much use any of the wood here because it's relatively dry, but he doesn't listen. There's also a really nice lake not too far from here, so I decided to go over there. It's actually getting quite dark now, and I didn't take into account how quick it was going to get dark. The scenery was breathtaking though. There was beautiful plants on either side of me, and I felt very, very peaceful here. I don't know, I just didn't feel any reason to feel terribly unsafe. I just felt settled, cool, calm and confident. Now I can see my friend by the water. It looks like he's taking a drink from it, and I think that's really weird. He's standing under a tree, so I can't really see it too well, but it definitely was weird. He was kind of bent over like an animal doing so. As I approach, I can see that he's stood up now and slowly makes his way somewhere else. I thought it was pretty funny and start smiling to myself, like he was just acting weird on purpose and walking with a strange limp. I don't know what direction he went in, but I wanted to just sit by the water for a little while to gather my thoughts. I thought, you know what, if I didn't lose that fishing kit, I probably could have had a really good catch by now and some really good dinner. I remembered what the ranger told me, but for some reason I didn't care in that moment. I just felt a bit more hungry and I was starting to lose my senses to it. That's when I head back. Now I eventually make it back to where my friend is and I say, yeah, you're definitely a wild animal. I then explain what happened and he tells me that no, I was not by the lake. I don't really take him seriously, as I rarely can, but there was something in his tone which felt different and kind of got to my core. I thought this was really odd. Now I realise it wasn't him, and I think, well, maybe it's the park ranger. And I ask if he's seen the park ranger, but my friend says that no, he hasn't. Now, for the next part of the story, I'm going to have to go to my friend's perspective. So I basically drifted off to sleep really easily, and I'm pretty happy with this. I wake up, and my friend is gone at some point in the night, so I thought that maybe he went out to the toilet or something. Dreary-eyed, I look out the tent, and I'm sure that I can see something with a very tall silhouette standing up with kind of bow-legged feet, and that has a weird pig face. I didn't believe my eyes. It looks like it's wearing some kind of woolen trousers or something, and it's crazily tall. It's probably about 30 feet away or something, but it's just watching from the tree line, and I can hear those boar sounds again. I think I'm extremely tired. I felt it and realised I'm just delirious, so go off back to sleep again. My friend then tells me that he woke up at some point in the night and he really had to go to the bathroom, so I was right about that. He said for some reason he wanted to see the lake at night. Apparently he's never seen the lake before like this, so he finds something really peaceful about it. He then tells me that he decided he wanted to urinate in the lake. Don't ask me why. I don't see how this is liberating or anything, but he goes on some stupid rant about how it's almost like the cycle of life. I was actually annoyed because the next day I ended up washing off in the lake before he actually told me this, but he eventually goes there and finishes business. Then he hears something really odd. He says he can hear breathing coming from behind him. He thought it was me and didn't react, and he just slowly turns around. He said he got about halfway back to the tent and had a feeling that something was just odd and just off. He says that he turns around and I kid you not, he sees a 7 feet figure standing there with what he describes as very bowed legs, looking like it was kind of horse shaped at the bottom, then having the face of a pig and standing there with very big hands up against a tree. He said he couldn't believe what he was seeing, and again he put it down to being delirious. He then said this thing kind of half danced and swayed left to right, making a weird sound while it did. My friend actually starts to think maybe it was a skinwalker that he was imagining or something, so just comes back to the tent and goes back to sleep. Now, I'm telling you this because it was only about halfway through the next day that we both realised what had happened. I was asking my friend where he went off to, and then my friend explains exactly what happened, and I can see the blood draining from his face. What we both described matched absolutely perfectly to each other. We suddenly realised that it wasn't both of us being delirious, imagining the exact same thing. My friend looks more horrified than me, and we decided to cancel the rest of the trip immediately. We were so scared that we actually didn't pack up the rest of our things. We ended up day hiking and partly night hiking until eventually we make it back, and we're both covered in sweat now. We ended up going into the ranger station and trying to report what we've seen, and they take it quite seriously. One of the older rangers then says, "Yeah, you bumped into one of the devils out there. You know the Jersey Devil? We've got him. We've got our own one and he lives out there." I then ask him to elaborate, and he says that apparently people have been seeing him for years out there, but I don't know if I actually believe this or not. I don't know what I saw that day, I just know that it scared me to my core. I actually have goosebumps when I think about it, but I'm not too scared, not like I used to be. I actually think it was kind of a blessing I was able to see something so weird and supernatural almost like this. That's if it is supernatural, but I don't know what else it could have been. I wish I had a more clear state of mind and I wasn't so tired when I saw it, because I would have paid more attention. But I just don't know what to make of this all. So my story isn't necessarily paranormal, but something scary that happened to me. Okay, so I'll get to my story now. I want to give you some info about how my family's campsite was set up. Altogether, there's about 14 of us, including my baby niece and our friend's infant granddaughter, with people hopping in and out of camp for work-related reasons. So the campsite was split in 4, with my aunt and uncle on the top left, my cousin, her husband, and her baby on the right. The friend of the family, which included 3 people and 1 baby, and finally the bottom right, where me, my cousin, her boyfriend and mum and sister were situated. So everything went off without a hitch for the most of the week, with everybody hanging out having a good time. But just as we thought everything was going great, a car pulled into the campsite next to mine, and 2 middle-aged men get out of the car, and we don't think much of it at first. It was later in the week when we got a taste of what we're in for. So the way to our campsite is positioned in a state park, and we had to walk all the way down the street to the bathroom. So this part of the story was told to me by my cousins. So right as we're going to bed, my cousin, her boyfriend, and my auntie were all walking to go to the bathroom to change when they're met with the sound of an agonizing scream, with one of the 2 men standing at the end of the road punching himself in the face while screaming at the absolute top of his lungs. Needless to say, they decided to turn around and go to different bathrooms. The second experience happened to me when I woke up around 9 AM to the sound of 2 men having a decently loud conversation. I'd just woken up, so the details are a bit buzzy, but I vaguely remembered them saying, "The FBI doesn't have anything on us," and talking about the government and other crazy things. Now, it all sounded like crazy talk, and to be honest, it gave me a little bit of chuckle when I first heard it. It was only when I spoke to my aunt, eating breakfast, and hearing my cousin's story that made me start to realize that something was really wrong with these people. Okay, so the third story comes to you from my mum, who I tend to believe a bit more than my cousin, so I'm 100% certain. So I was helping my mum take down our tent, and pack up into our car after dinner, and I went to my aunt's camp to get some water when my mum claimed to hear them say, "I'm gonna do something horrible to that mother." Now the slurs continue, and now at this point we're both disgusted and had assumed that these guys are schizophrenic or something. However, this wasn't all. Halfway through the day, one of the guys left the campsite with the car to do something, so me and my mum, thinking both of them were gone, saw an opportunity to go and change and hang our clothes. However, on the way to the bathroom, we once again saw the second man walking towards his campsite. We thought that they were good on the walk back, thinking nobody would be there. Well, right. We then heard him screaming at the top of his lungs again as he walked by the campsite. We noticed something. No car, no other guy. This man was absolutely screaming at nothing, and I have no idea why it shook me to my core. I'm leaving in a few hours now, and all I can think to myself is, God, thank God this is over. Now, I'm somebody who's done wildlife photography, so I go hiking every Sunday, and have been for about a year now. With the frequency I go hiking, it might be surprising that I have two experiences. Or maybe I'm not so sure about frequency. Both my experiences take place in the western part of Wisconsin. My first experience was at a semi-defunct state, ground in the middle of the summer. I say semi-defunct because there was a newer gravel parking lot by the gravel road, and a gated off-road leading deeper to what used to be a paid parking lot and an RV campsite area. It's about a mile away from the gravel parking lot and paved lot, and this walk goes fine. The road continues past the paved lot for about a mile and then splits into almost a non-existent trail. It was after I got past the paved lot that things get strange. I start to get a feeling that was hard to describe. It just felt wrong. Every step I took, I had the thought, you shouldn't have took another step, you should turn around. The feeling kept growing and growing in intensity until I get to the end of the road, and I couldn't take it anymore and turned and went back because I had the strong feeling that if I went on the trail, something bad would happen. The walking back to the gravel lot is just fine, and by the time I get to the lot, the feeling's completely gone, and I look for the gates ahead of the gravel road. The second one I will say is probably just a deer, but I'll let you decide. The hike is in early fall. I went off the trail down a gully and followed a small creek. All in all, it was a good hike until I rounded a bend and saw a cave. My initial thought was to check it out, and that nagging feeling was like, no, somewhere in here is evil. I admittedly think it was maybe a homeless person, but as soon as I turned away, I had the feeling of being watched that so many people describe out there, so I turned back, tracked back, and was about 2 miles into the hike when I suddenly got a much more stronger urge. Now my eyes are basically darting all over the place, and I was literally almost walking sideways on the trail. Then all of a sudden, a huge crash comes from behind me. I didn't see anything before or after the crash. This is why I think it was maybe a deer, but it felt too intense for that. The feeling actually doesn't leave me until I'm in the car and I've actually drove away. Maybe it was an overreaction by fight or flight, but it was really weird. I think it's strange too, I didn't actually see anything. I was out with a friend, a few miles from Pikes Peak in Colorado. We were hiking on this trail, and up ahead, I see a blue window breaker in the middle of the trail. We hadn't seen anybody else walking all day, so it was weird. It was placed right in the middle of the path. But hey, things happen, and people drop things, so maybe it fell out of the backpack and nobody notices. Now the windbreaker was just a piece of this entire campsite that we ended up coming across that was absolutely torn to shreds. There was a tent, a hammock, a cooler and a backpack, and various articles of clothing thrown about as well. The tent had broken poles and was shredded. It looked like it was from the early 2000s with fading kind of style to it. Think of basic 4-person tent from Walmart. Now the hammock was still hanging empty and the cooler was opened and empty and there were some clothes scattered. We thought to ourselves that this really looked like somebody's just gone off and vanished, like they've truly disappeared. It's really weird for us to see. Now for some background, I live in the UK and my flat is located next to a large forest. There's a path which used to be a railway track but has now been converted into a cycle/walk path with links to the city, preserving the heritage of the rail track. Now some of the old train stations still exist with platforms, although the building itself has been converted to an open space to walk around in. The path's fairly lit up, except the train stations. Now story time. Last year, my friends and girlfriend had visited me over the weekend to party, and we have fun since we live at least 1.5 hours away. Now my roommate, also from the same hometown and friends with the group, suggested that we should have a campfire. Now being a forest, I didn't want to alert neighbouring flats and potentially get told off. The abandoned train station had good coverage from watchful eyes, and it was safe enough to do a campfire. It even had a pit from someone else having a campfire before. So we're here at 11 PM. We pick a time where that we could practically be the only ones using the path. We laid our blankets and started playing our music and tried to light the firewood. It just wouldn't light though, and we're running out of paper. We then heard a voice, although we could not identify where it was coming from. We all went silent thinking a passer heard the music from the station. After a few minutes of silence, we resumed our activities. Now 15 minutes later, the voice is more audible and more aggressive. It started off with a grunt and worse, sounded more like there were multiple grunts followed by "who's there?" There was a metal sheet in the corner of the station and my friend said he saw it moving. We all made the decision to pack up shop and leave as quickly as possible. One of my friends was visibly upset and wouldn't move. We had to drag her out. I then turned around and I saw some kind of shadow, which I believe is a very tall man, staring at us, moving quickly towards us. I shout to my friend group to leg it and we run until we reach the streetlights and the housing estate. We're all quite shaken up, and in hindsight, it was probably a bad idea in the first place. My bet is that it's a homeless man who was drugged up and disturbed by the fire, but I don't know what would have happened if we stayed any longer. I hope I never have to encounter this person again. I live in Alberta. We have bears, lynx, moose, wolves and cougars. The cougars scare me more than anything else out here. Now, my husband and I were out hiking on an old hunting trail quite far into the park with our dog. The dog was super big, a Rottweiler, an Irish wolfhound, and very well trained. We'd been hiking for about 2 hours and stopped for a rest on a fallen log. We'd been sitting for just a few minutes when the dog suddenly starts to bark. He sits up and stares intently into the dense brush bordering the path. After a minute, he jumps up and starts growling and hackles. He's now standing between us and the brush. We didn't see a thing though, but we know that there's cougars in the area. Not much else is out there, so it's quiet and hidden out there, so we pack up and start hiking back. The dog is super relieved we're walking and leaving, following us, checking behind us every so often. While we hike back for 10 minutes or so, the dog stops, staring behind us, growling loudly again. We have bear spray but no gun. We figure the cougar is following us, so we keep hiking back and the bear spray's out. It goes like that for roughly an hour. We hike for a while, dog watching our back and occasionally stopping to growl. Whatever he senses, we actually don't. The dog stays tense for the rest of the way back and keeps looking over our shoulders. But the last half of the hike, he doesn't growl at anything else. Still scared the life out of me, but I'm so grateful that the dog actually stuck with us instead of running off, which usually ends in people being eaten. Now, a college buddy and I were out about one night in my hometown during the summer break. I was obviously still living at home with my parents and he was down visiting for the weekend. I live in a pretty small town, nothing to do there, so we found ourselves wandering around for a bit and wound up starting a small campfire in a small sandy clearing in the woods near our local softball field. It's a clear night out, not a single cloud in the sky, and the moon was full, so we could very clearly see everything around us. It was just one of those nights that was barely dark because the moon's so bright and we're just chill talking, no big deal. Now suddenly, we heard a scream come out from deeper in the woods. We both instantly be quiet and start listening, trying to figure out what we've just heard. Then we heard it again, but this time it was clearer and definitely sounded like someone screaming, like a little girl screaming in absolute terror. We both kinda just stood there for a moment staring at each other. I was mostly staring at him, hoping to get some answers back to what we heard. My buddy was one of those guys who practically lived out in the woods. He's an avid hunter and fisher and done so his entire life, and has since spent a summer camping in another area. I was expecting him to write it off as an owl or hawk or even a fisher cat, something, but the look on his face was probably more terrified than mine, simply because he knew it wasn't any of those, and that made me even more scared. Then we hear it again, louder and closer, seemingly coming from up in the trees or something. We both freaked out. Somehow, we had the pressure, but the perseverance of mind to quickly put out our fire. The abundant sand actually helped in that regard, and the moment the fire was out, we both ran as fast as we could to get out of there. We ran out of the woods and into the softball field area, where it was straight shot out the road. Now we both kind of run, and we're very scared. We can hear the screaming getting louder and louder. It's chasing us. Just as we reached the road, for some reason, we stopped and turned to wait. And then I heard it again closer, definitely coming from the air and not the ground. One more time, this time straight above me. Remember when I said it was a cloudless night with a full moon? Very bright. I could see the sky as clear as day, yet I heard a little girl screaming in terror above my head, but nothing was there. We both turned and ran, and this time we didn't stop until we get to my mum and dad's home. I told this story to numerous people, including a lot of people who are way more woodsy than I am, but nobody's come up with an explanation for this. Part of me is convinced it's an owl, but so far, I've never heard an owl scream like that at all. If I had a recording, I would have just played it, but it would have sounded exactly like a girl screaming in terror. So that's my question, what on earth was this thing? I experienced a number of creepy things in my life, but this was by far the most scary of which ever happened to me. I'd worked as a park ranger for about 20 years before the experience had happened to me, so I kind of didn't expect anything too far out of the ordinary to happen. I'd like to share a few other tales before I get to my main story though, but the main one's definitely the most creepy for me. It still gives me nightmares actually. I remembered one of the most scary experiences I had, other than the main thing really, was somebody gone missing. Apparently it was a hiker wearing a blue coat, and some other hikers had actually reported seeing him somewhere out there. Apparently he was about 70 or so, who had always gone out there before, called Bill. Bill was actually quite popular with the locals too, so there was definitely some worry when nobody was able to see him again. Apparently he was supposed to return to his wife, but he never ended up doing so, and that's when we got called out to go and find where he'd gone. I had a bad feeling about this one before I ever started it actually. I was actually quite worried, which again wasn't really a normal thing for me. Usually I felt really truly at home while out there. Being in the sun hitting my face, I didn't think there was much of a better feeling. But on this day, for whatever reason, I had a strange cold feeling going through my veins. I knew something was off. So off I go. I was kind of expecting to find him somewhere laid out, needing some water or something, but for the first while of searching, I couldn't really see anything or anyone. I saw some other hikers actually wearing blue things, and I was kind of convinced that I'd actually seen him, but it turned out I didn't. I remembered thinking I'd seen him multiple times, and it just never seemed to come off correctly. I thought it was pretty weird. I mean, I was absolutely certain that I was looking at somebody. I'd focus for a second and they'd be gone. Now this went on for the first hour or two of my hike trying to find him. I got to about the midway point and one of my colleagues was taking over from me. I told him that you have to be careful because I've seen him out here a few times I think, but I can't figure out where. He says okay. I then start walking back and strangely, I keep on seeing him in his blue jacket. I'm pretty sure it's the same one because it matches what the description is, but it seems like every time that I get close he seems to just vanish. I thought this was especially odd. I get back and have my break and I had a power nap actually. My dream was quite a weird vivid one. I do remember this part. I seem to remember it really clearly. It was like I was doing my job in my sleep. But there he was, Bill. He said it's okay and to come with him. I was actually really confused by this and decided just to follow him. He eventually led me to a lake in my dream, and I thought, well, that was weird, because I woke up pretty much straight away after to the alarm that I'd set myself not to oversleep. It also signified that it's now my time to go and help them out, so I made some effort to do so, and I switch over roles and I start heading back doing the search now. At the time I encountered another person, also in a blue jacket. I remember thinking to myself that why are there so many people out here in jackets like this? I must be going crazy or something. He said that he wanted to help me out. This guy actually looks really young compared to Bill, and I was pretty confident we were going to find him. We weren't really supposed to have help off of other people, but something just felt different this time and we set out. We start hiking the trail for a little while, and we get closer and closer to the designated search site. It didn't take too long before we found roughly where we were supposed to go, and this other person said, I'm sure that I saw him by the lake. I say okay and ask him to show me, and then we both go down further to try and investigate the area where apparently he is. I remembered on this specific hike and walk that something felt really different. I don't know how to describe it, but I just felt really warm. We eventually get further down and come across the lake. I turn to ask that guy for his name and he's disappeared, and that's when I see something floating in the lake. I then realise that I'm looking at a person and they have a blue jacket. I have this horrible feeling and I go to sit down for a second and put my hand on my head. I go to look around for the guy who helped me, but I can't find him. I then realise that what I'm looking at is a body in the lake. It's certain now. I radio in for some help and I just wait there not knowing what to do. The person's clearly long gone, so there's absolutely no point in me trying to go over to them, so I just sit and wait. Eventually some others come over and retrieve the body and confirm that it was Bill. I then ask if they've seen another young hiker wearing a blue jacket, and they say no, there's nobody here. I think that's really odd. And then they say that nobody else has been in the area or seen around here all day other than me. It still kind of creeps me out. I think somehow he come to help me guide him back to the body or something. I don't know, it's weird. Especially that mixed in with the dream just really doesn't sit too well with me. But anyway, I'd like to get to the main point of my story. So I was doing one of my patrols one day, and I actually went further than where I was supposed to. My boss really wasn't the best at the time, and I was basically just glad to get away from him. I remembered while I was walking further and further away from him that there was something really odd up ahead. It's what I can only describe as a Sasquatch. Out from a tree emerges a figure which is probably 7 feet tall, and I was met with an absolutely horrendous smell. This thing was covered in all black, and at first I was convinced it was a bear, but then I could see it wasn't. It was more humanoid shaped, if that makes sense. This thing looked at me, and I locked eyes with these terrible dark eyes for all of 2 seconds before it turns and starts coming towards me. No, I'm not joking, it honestly felt like the ground was shaking somehow. It couldn't have been because I was so far away, but I'm frozen the spot for a second before I realise this thing's picked up a jogging pace. I let out a scream and then start running in the opposite direction. I probably ran for about 3 minutes, looking over my shoulder every so often, and this thing didn't let up. I was pretty sure it was gaining on me, so I decided to go as downhill as I can to get back as quick as possible. I know the area well, but this thing seems to too because it's straight on my back. I probably got about another 10 feet away from where our base was, and suddenly I can feel some kind of silence. I turn and look around, and I can see that this thing is gone. I explain what's happened to some of the other workers there that weren't actually rangers but wanted to help out, so we go back to investigate. This time we're actually armed. We can see that something very large has come through here, actually knocking down trees somehow on its way. And there's a terrible smell, but we can never locate this thing again. Even working in these trails now, I'm still terrified that I'm going to encounter it again, and maybe it will see me before I see it. I don't want to say it was a Sasquatch, but I don't know what else I can actually explain it as. It really haunts me. Now I've had this story for 6 years, and I haven't really spoke about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend of mine. The campsite we picked was beautiful, and we're able to drive through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that weren't very far from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely nobody's around. We set up camp the next day, and we went hiking, soaked up in the hot springs, and come back and had dinner. It's all very normal until the next day. Now I need to give some context as to how we slept that night, so you can understand my confusion. Before we go to sleep, I put our food cooler and a stereo that we brought into the car and lock it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and put the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far right side of the tent away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest to the door of the tent with a gun next to him. We woke up the next morning and I felt fine. I had slept hard, and from inside the tent everything seems normal. We get out. Our campsite was in absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined, the cooler had been thrown over, and things are scattered everywhere. Even the stereo was smashed to pieces laying next to a tree. All of the car doors are open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute in silence, just taking everything in. The woods felt off now. It was quiet, and not really the beautiful place that we saw yesterday. Everything feels wrong now. My ex accuses me of not locking the door the night before, and that an animal got our stuff, but I promise I locked it. I then go back into the tent to get the keys from my backpack, but they aren't there. I then found them later on the ground next to the car. We quickly throw everything into the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what had happened. He finally spoke up when we're almost home and told me that night he had a dream that somebody was kneeling over him holding a gun, just staring at him. When I tried to question him more, he said he didn't want to talk about it, and that I shouldn't speak about it anymore. I've tried to forget about it, but I just can't. Something wrong happened to us those nights in the woods then, and I just cannot explain it.